The diplomatic chamber aboard the Zephyrian mothership buzzed with cruel laughter as Ambassador Vextar displayed the human captive on the central platform. Sarah Chen, barely 18 years old, lay unconscious on the cold metal surface. Her left leg twisted at an unnatural angle from the crash that had brought her here. Blood seeped through her torn uniform, and her breathing came in shallow, pained gasps. "Behold, representatives of the Galactic Council," Vextar announced with theatrical grandeur, his forearms gesturing dramatically. "A specimen of the species that dares call itself humanity. Look how fragile they are, how easily broken." The assembled aliens erupted in amused chittering and electronic buzzes of agreement. The Zephyrians had found Sarah's escape pod drifting in the debris field of the research vessel Endeavor. The ship had been conducting peaceful xenobiological surveys when pirates attacked, forcing the crew to abandon ship. Sarah, a junior researcher fresh out of the academy, had been the sole survivor of Pod Bay 7's escape sequence. "This pathetic creature represents Earth's finest," continued Vextar, prodding Sarah's injured leg with a metal rod. She groaned softly but didn't wake. Their bones snap like twigs, their skin tears like paper, and their lifespans are laughably brief. Yet these humans believe they deserve a seat among us, the evolved races of the galaxy. The Korvaxi delegate, a insectoid being with razor-sharp mandibles, clicked approvingly. "Perhaps we should dissect it while it still lives. Study its primitive biology before reporting back to their pathetic homeworld." "Too merciful," hissed the Serpentine Vorthak representative. "I say we broadcast its suffering across their communication networks. Let them see what happens to species that reach beyond their grasp." Ambassador Drakthi of the Molten Core Empire leaned forward, his crystalline form pulsing with orange light. "The humans have something they call luck, do they not? Perhaps we should test it." His voice resonated like grinding stone. "I propose we offer this broken creature to the great worm of Kethmori. Let us see if human fortune can save her from certain death." The suggestion sent a wave of excited murmurs through the assembly. The great worm was legendary throughout the galaxy, an ancient dragon that had outlived civilizations, whose very presence could incinerate starships. For over 3 millennia, various species had appeased the creature by offering it tribute and sacrifices. The worm dwelt in the hollow core of a dead planet, surrounded by the bones of countless offerings. "Brilliant." Vextar's eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. "Yes, let us see this human's legendary resilience against the oldest predator in known space. We'll broadcast every moment to their home system. Let Earth witness the fate that awaits all who challenge the natural order." As the aliens debated the specifics of their cruel entertainment, Sarah's consciousness flickered. Through her pain-hazed awareness, she caught fragments of their conversation. Her body screamed in agony, but her mind remained sharp, a trait that had earned her a place on the Endeavor despite her youth. She had always been gifted at pattern recognition and problem-solving, skills that now worked frantically to process her dire situation. The research vessel's cultural database had contained extensive files on galactic species and their histories. Sarah remembered reading about the great worm during long shifts monitoring stellar phenomena. The creature was old, possibly older than human civilization itself. But there had been something else in those files. Something about the dragon's behavior patterns that didn't match typical predator psychology. Sarah forced herself to remain limp as the aliens finalized their plans. She would need every advantage, every piece of information if she hoped to survive what was coming. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had joined the survey mission to study alien life forms, never imagining she would become a specimen herself. "The entertainment value alone will be worth the fuel costs," Vextar was saying. "We'll approach Kethmori at sublight speeds, giving our audience time to gather. Every major species should witness this demonstration of human weakness." The Zephyrian's aide, a smaller version of Vextar with only 2 arms, scuttled forward. "Sir, should we heal the creature's injuries first? The worm might prefer its offering intact." "Absolutely not," Vextar snapped. "Let the dragon see humanity as they truly are, broken, bleeding, and helpless." The symbolism is perfect. As the mothership changed course toward the desolate system containing Kethmori, Sarah Chen closed her eyes and began to plan. Her knowledge of xenobiology and the fragments she remembered about dragon behavior might be her only weapons. The aliens expected her to cower and beg, to provide them with the spectacle of human terror. They had no idea what humans were truly capable of when cornered. The ship's artificial gravity hummed beneath her, and Sarah felt the subtle shift as they entered hyperspace. She had perhaps 6 hours before they reached the worm's domain. 6 hours to prepare for an encounter that would either prove humanity's worth to the galaxy or serve as a brutal example of human frailty. But Sarah Chen had not survived the destruction of the Endeavor and 3 days in a damaged escape pod by being weak. She had endured by being smart, adaptable, and absolutely determined to live. The aliens thought they were delivering a helpless victim to an ancient monster. Instead, they were about to witness something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization, a demonstration of the indomitable human spirit that refused to surrender, even in the face of certain death. The great worm of Kethmori was about to meet something it had never encountered before. A human who understood that sometimes the smallest beings could change the course of history. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace toward her apparent doom, Sarah Chen smiled despite her pain. The aliens wanted a show, and she was going to give them one they would never forget. The dead planet Kethmori loomed before them like a massive gravestone against the starfield. Once a thriving world, it now existed as a hollow shell, its core excavated by the great worm over millennia of habitation. The surface was pockmarked with crater-sized holes leading down into the planet's depths, and the thin atmosphere glowed with traces of exotic radiation from the dragon's presence. Ambassador Vextar stood before the main view screen, practically vibrating with anticipation. Behind him, Sarah remained motionless on the platform, though her apparent unconsciousness was now carefully calculated. She had spent the journey gathering every scrap of information she could from overheard conversations and her own memories of the cultural database. Broadcasting to all major systems now. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving confirmations from the Hegemony, the Trade Federation, and even the reclusive Ethereals. Estimated viewing audience, 47 billion across 233 worlds." "Excellent," Vexitar purred. "Let the galaxy witness what happens to species that overestimate their importance." He gestured to his guards. "Prepare the offering platform. We'll launch her in a standard atmospheric entry capsule. We want her conscious when she meets the worm." The capsule was a simple affair, designed for one-way trips. Barely large enough for a single occupant, it contained minimal life support and no means of escape. As the guards loaded Sarah's seemingly unconscious form inside, she memorized every detail of the craft's interior. The emergency manual, though written in Zephyrian script, contained universal symbols she could interpret. More importantly, she spotted something the aliens had missed, a small maintenance panel that might prove useful. The capsule bay pressurized, and Sarah felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity, giving way to the planet's weaker pull. Through the tiny porthole, she watched Kethmori's scarred surface rushing up to meet her. The entry was rough, the capsule's heat shields glowing cherry red as they pierced the thin atmosphere. When the craft finally impacted in a cloud of dust and debris, Sarah allowed herself a moment to assess her condition. Her leg was definitely broken, probably in 2 places, and she could feel the sharp ache of cracked ribs with every breath. But she was alive, conscious, and thinking clearly. That was more than the aliens expected. The capsule door hissed open automatically, and Sarah crawled out onto the planet's surface. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a strange metallic taste that made her nose burn. All around her stretched a landscape of polished bone. Not small fragments, but massive skeletal remains of creatures so large they dwarfed Earth's ancient dinosaurs. Some of the skulls could have housed small buildings. "Fascinating," she whispered to herself, her scientific training overriding her fear. These weren't random victims. The arrangement was deliberate, almost artistic. The dragon wasn't just a mindless predator. It was intelligent, possibly more so than any of the species currently watching her supposed demise. A deep rumble echoed from the nearest cavern entrance, and Sarah felt the ground vibrate beneath her hands. Something massive was moving in the depths below. She had perhaps minutes before the great worm emerged to investigate its latest offering. Working quickly despite her injuries, Sarah crawled back to the capsule and pried open the maintenance panel she had spotted. Inside, she found what she was looking for, a small emergency beacon and a basic toolkit. The beacon wouldn't reach orbit through the planet's radiation field, but she had a different plan for it. The rumbling grew louder, and a glow began emanating from the cavern depths. Not the orange-red of fire, but a cool blue-white that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Sarah positioned herself carefully, making sure she appeared helpless while keeping the modified beacon within reach. When the great worm finally emerged, the sight took her breath away despite her preparation. The dragon was enormous beyond imagination, easily 200 meters from snout to tail tip. Its scales weren't the expected metallic sheen of fantasy depictions, but instead seemed to be composed of some crystalline substance that refracted light into prismatic patterns. Most striking were its eyes, deep pools of intelligence that held the weight of eons. This was not a beast driven by hunger or instinct. This was an ancient being that had chosen to remain on this desolate world for reasons of its own. The worm's massive head descended until it was just meters from Sarah, and she could feel the heat radiating from its breath. When it spoke, the voice resonated through both the air and her bones, speaking in perfect galactic standard. "Another offering from the small minds above," the dragon said, its tone carrying more weariness than menace. "They never learn, do they? Always assuming that age equals hunger, that power equals cruelty." The great eyes studied her intently. "But you are different, small one. You do not cower or plead." Curious, Sarah took a shaky breath, fighting through the pain to speak clearly. "Great Worm, I am Sarah Chen of Earth. I have not come here to beg for my life or to provide entertainment for those who watch from above. I have come because I believe you and I share something that they do not understand." The dragon's head tilted slightly, an almost amused expression crossing its ancient features. "Oh, and what might that be, little human?" "Loneliness," Sarah said simply, "and the burden of being underestimated by lesser minds." A sound like distant thunder rumbled from the worm's chest. Laughter, Sarah realized. "In 3,000 years, you are the first to speak to me as an equal, rather than as a supplicant or a monster." "Tell me, child of Earth, what do you know of burdens?" Sarah gestured to the carefully arranged bone garden around them. "I know that this isn't the lair of a mindless beast. I know that you've been alone here for millennia, accepting offerings not because you need them but because it maintains a balance that keeps the galaxy stable. You're not a monster, Great Worm. You're a guardian, and possibly the loneliest being in existence." The dragon's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Sarah saw something that shook her to her core. Hope. Hope that someone finally might understand. Above them, 47 billion beings across the galaxy watched and waited for the human to be devoured. Instead, they were about to witness the beginning of a conversation that would change everything. The great worm settled onto the bone-strewn ground with surprising grace, its massive form coiling in a way that suggested comfort rather than aggression. The gesture was so unexpectedly peaceful that it sent ripples of confusion through the watching galaxy. 3 millennia, the dragon said, its voice carrying the weight of ages. 3,000 years since anyone spoke to me as Keth Mori rather than the Great Worm or the Terror of the Void. Do you know what my name means in the old tongue, Sarah Chen of Earth? Sarah shook her head, struggling to remain upright despite her injuries. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, and the pain was becoming harder to ignore. Keeper of the Deep Peace, Keth Mori translated. I was not always what these fools above believe me to be. Once I was a mediator, a being who helped young species find their place among the stars. But fear is a powerful force, and over time, fear transformed understanding into mythology. The dragon's great eyes turned skyward, where the Zephyrian mothership and dozens of other vessels maintained their distance. They tell stories now, these children of newer worlds. Stories of a monster that demands sacrifice, of an ancient evil that must be appeased. They have forgotten that every offering brought to me was given shelter, not death. Sarah's mind raced. The bones, they're not victims. No, little one. They are those who came seeking refuge and found it in death. But natural death after long lives spent in peace. Some stayed decades, some centuries. All found what they could not find among their own kind. Kethamori's voice grew sad, but as their stories returned to the galaxy, truth became legend and legend became myth. It served a purpose, maintaining a balance between the warring factions above. Sometimes a shared fear is the only thing that prevents total war. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The dragon wasn't a monster. It was perhaps the most tragic figure in galactic history, a being who had sacrificed its own reputation to maintain peace. And now she was here, injured and alone while billions watched and waited for her death. Why did you allow the deception to continue? She asked. Kethmori's crystalline scales shifted, catching the pale light. Because truth is often less powerful than myth. The galaxy needed something to fear more than each other. As long as I remained the Great Worm, the ancient terror, the various species would unite in their caution. Remove that shared fear, and they would likely tear each other apart within a generation. Sarah felt a fierce anger rising in her chest, not at the dragon, but at the situation. So you've been alone all this time, bearing the weight of their ignorance and fear, keeping the peace through your own isolation. A burden I chose willingly, the dragon replied, but one that grows heavier with each passing century. Do you understand now why your words intrigued me? You spoke of loneliness, of being underestimated. Your species is young, barely noticed by the greater powers, yet here you sit, seeing truth where others see only their own projections. Above them, Sarah could sense the growing impatience of the watching crowds. They had come to see terror and death, not conversation. Ambassador Vextar was probably furious that his entertainment wasn't proceeding as planned. Keth Mori, Sarah said, using the dragon's true name deliberately. What if there was another way? What if instead of maintaining peace through fear, we could build something better? The ancient being's laugh was like wind through crystal caves. You speak like a true human, always looking for alternatives to impossible situations. But child, I have lived for over 10,000 years. I have seen species rise and fall, watched civilizations bloom and wither. This balance, imperfect as it is, has preserved more lives than any other arrangement in galactic history. But at what cost to you? Sarah pressed. And what happens when you're gone? This system only works because of your sacrifice. When you finally pass into whatever comes after, who will take your place? Who else will accept eternal isolation for the greater good? For the first time, the dragon looked genuinely surprised. You think in terms of succession, of systemic change rather than personal survival. Most beings brought here spend their time pleading for their lives or cursing their fate. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the sharp pain in her ribs. I'm a researcher, Kethamori. My job is to look at data and find patterns to solve problems. And this situation, your situation, is one of the greatest problems I've ever encountered. The greatest problem being my loneliness. There was gentle humor in the dragon's voice. No, Sarah said firmly. The greatest problem being that the galaxy's peace depends on the suffering of its most noble inhabitant. That's not balance. That's injustice on a cosmic scale. Kethamori was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in the silence. Above them, she knew the alien viewers were growing restless. Some might be starting to suspect that this wasn't going according to their expectations. You proposed change to a system that has worked for 3 millennia, the dragon finally said. What could a young human possibly offer that I have not already considered? Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the modified emergency beacon. With great effort, she activated it and placed it on the ground between them. A voice, she said simply. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy is watching you. They expect to see a monster, but what if they saw the truth instead? The beacon began transmitting. Its signal strong enough to reach the ships above despite the planet's interference. But instead of a distress call, it was broadcasting on all communication frequencies simultaneously. What are you doing, child? Kethamori asked, though there was more curiosity than alarm in its voice. Sarah looked up at the dragon, her eyes burning with determination despite her pain. I'm giving you the chance to tell your own story. For once, instead of letting others define who you are, you can speak for yourself. The entire galaxy is listening right now, waiting to see the great worm destroy another helpless victim. She gestured to the beacon. Instead, they're going to hear the truth about Kethamori, keeper of the deep peace. They're going to learn what you've sacrificed for them, what you've endured, and what you really are. The dragon stared at the small device, then at Sarah. And if the truth destroys the balance I've maintained? If knowledge of my nature leads to the very wars I've spent millennia preventing? Sarah smiled through her pain. Then we'll find a better way. That's what humans do. We break systems that depend on suffering and build something better in their place, even if it takes us 1,000 tries to get it right. For the first time in 3,000 years, Kethamori, the keeper of the deep peace, considered the possibility that its long vigil might finally be ending, not in death, but in something far more precious, hope for a better tomorrow. The silence that followed Sarah's challenge seemed to stretch across the entire galaxy. Aboard the Zephyrian mothership, Ambassador Vextar stared at the communication displays in growing alarm as the beacon's signal overrode their broadcast controls. "Sir, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the planet's surface," the communications officer reported, his voice tight with confusion. "The signal is somehow bypassing our jamming protocols and broadcasting directly to all ships in the vicinity." "Cut the feed," Vextar snarled. "This was meant to be a simple execution, not some primitive human's publicity stunt." "I cannot, sir. The signal is using frequencies I've never seen before. It's as if the planet itself is amplifying the transmission." On Keth Mori's surface, the ancient dragon studied the small beacon with newfound interest. "Your device should not be capable of such range," it said slowly. "The radiation field around this world has prevented communications for millennia." Sarah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You've been alone by choice, haven't you? The radiation field isn't natural. You've been maintaining it to keep the galaxy at bay." "Perceptive," Keth Mori acknowledged. "But your beacon seems to have found a way through my barriers. How curious that human technology would succeed where others have failed." "Maybe it's not about the technology," Sarah suggested. "Maybe it's about the message. You've spent 3,000 years hiding your truth. Perhaps some part of you wants that truth to finally be heard." The dragon's great head tilted, considering this possibility. Around them, the bone garden seemed to gleam brighter in the strange atmospheric light, as if the ancient remains were themselves eager witnesses to this moment. "If I speak," Keth Mori said slowly, "if I tell them what you believe they need to hear, there will be no returning to the old ways. The myth will die, and with it the fear that has kept the major powers in check. Then we'll have to trust that the truth is stronger than fear," Sarah replied, "and that the galaxy is ready to grow up." Keth Mori was quiet for a long moment, then slowly lowered its massive head until it was level with the beacon. When it spoke, its voice carried across space to billions of listeners who had expected to hear the roars of a monster and the screams of a victim. "People of the galaxy," the dragon began, its words calm and measured. "I am called many names by many species. The Great Worm, the Terror of Keth Mori, the Ancient Devourer. But my true name is Keth Mori, and I was not always what your myths have made me." Aboard the watching ships, the effect was immediate. Creatures who had come to witness an execution found themselves listening to something impossible. An articulate, philosophical voice emerging from the mouth of their oldest nightmare. 10,000 years ago, I was a mediator among the stars," Keth Mori continued. "I helped young species find their place in a galaxy that was already ancient, when your civilizations were mere dreams. I witnessed the rise of the first interstellar councils, the establishment of trade routes that still exist today, and the delicate negotiations that prevented countless wars." The dragon paused, and Sarah could see the weight of memory in its ancient eyes. "But peace is fragile, and as the galaxy grew more crowded, more competitive, the old systems began to fail. Species that had once cooperated began to view each other as threats. Wars erupted over resources, territory, and ideological differences. The galaxy was tearing itself apart. The Korvaxi delegate aboard the Zephyrian ship clicked its mandibles nervously. "This cannot be true. The Great Worm is a beast, not a philosopher." "It was then," Keth Mori's voice continued across the void, "that I made a choice that would define the rest of my existence. The warring factions needed something to fear more than each other. They needed a common threat that would force them to cooperate, to maintain their resources for defense rather than waste them on aggression." "No," breathed Forthak, Representative Sistek. "It cannot be." "I became that threat," the dragon said simply. "I withdrew to this dead world and began accepting the offerings that frightened governments sent to appease me. But instead of destruction, I offered sanctuary. Every being brought here found peace, protection, and the chance to live out their natural lives in safety. When they died, I honored them by preserving their remains in this garden of memory." Sarah watched as the truth hit the watching fleets like a physical wave. She could imagine the shock, the disbelief, the dawning horror of realization spreading across 47 billion viewers. "For 3,000 years, Keth Mori continued, I have maintained this deception. I allowed myself to be painted as a monster, so that the real monsters among you would hesitate before attacking their neighbors. I accepted isolation so that you might know peace. I became the nightmare that prevented your nightmares from becoming reality. The communication channels erupted in chaos. Delegates who had spent their careers invoking the great worm's name as justification for military buildup suddenly found themselves face to face with the truth of their own manipulation. But why reveal this now? The dragon's voice asked, and Sarah realized it was addressing her as much as the watching galaxy. Because a young human has reminded me that truth, however painful, is more valuable than comfortable lies. Because isolation without purpose is mere suffering, and perhaps it is time for this old keeper of peace to consider whether the galaxy might be ready for a better way. Sarah found her voice, speaking toward the beacon with all the strength she could muster. "The dragon isn't the monster in this story," she called out, her words carrying to every ship in the system. "The monster is a system that requires the suffering of the innocent to maintain order. Kethmori has paid the price for your peace for 3 millennia. Maybe it's time you learned to maintain it yourselves." The silence that followed was different from before, not the expectant quiet of spectators waiting for violence, but the stunned silence of minds trying to process a fundamental shift in their understanding of the universe. On the Zephyrian mothership, Ambassador Vexitar stared at the display showing wildly fluctuating communication channels as every delegation tried to speak at once. The entertainment he had planned had become something else entirely, a moment that would be remembered as the day the galaxy learned that its greatest monster had actually been its greatest protector. "Sir," his aide whispered. "What do we do now?" Vexitar had no answer. Like everyone else in the system, he was discovering that everything he thought he knew about the balance of galactic power had just been revealed as an elaborate illusion maintained by the sacrifice of a single, impossibly noble being. And at the center of it all sat a injured human girl who had somehow managed to convince a dragon to give up 3,000 years of carefully maintained isolation for the chance at something better. The aftermath of Kethmori's revelation rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. Within hours of the broadcast, emergency sessions were called in every major government, trade federation, and military alliance. The comfortable certainties that had governed interstellar politics for 3 millennia lay in ruins, replaced by a single, inescapable truth. Their greatest enemy had actually been their greatest benefactor. On the planet's surface, Sarah struggled to stay conscious as the pain from her injuries intensified. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her dizzy and nauseous. Kethmori noticed her deteriorating condition immediately. "You are badly hurt, young one," the dragon said, its voice gentle with concern. "Why did you not speak of this sooner?" "Because," Sarah gasped, "it wasn't about me. It was about getting them to listen, to understand what you've been carrying all these years." The dragon's great head lowered until it was just above her, and Sarah felt a warm, tingling sensation wash over her body. The pain in her leg began to subside, and she could breathe more easily. "I have some skill in healing," Kethmori explained. "It comes from 10,000 years of tending to those who sought my protection. Your bones will mend, though they will need time." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, then looked up at the still broadcasting beacon. "What happens now?" "The whole galaxy knows the truth. Now we discover whether 3,000 years of evolution has produced wisdom along with technology," the dragon replied. "The early responses are mixed. Indeed, the communication channels were chaotic with conflicting reactions. Some species were calling for immediate investigations into their own military expenditures, questioning decades of defense spending justified by the worm threat. Others were demanding proof, refusing to believe that their fundamental understanding of galactic politics could be so wrong. The hegemony's response was swift and predictable. Supreme Chancellor Morthak appeared on all official channels within an hour, his metallic features set in grim determination. "Citizens of the hegemony," he announced, "do not be deceived by this obvious manipulation. The creature that calls itself Kethmori seeks to lower our defenses through false compassion. We must remain vigilant against this new form of psychological warfare." But the Chancellor's words fell on increasingly skeptical ears. Too many pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The mysterious disappearances of diplomatic hostages who had been sacrificed to the worm, only to vanish completely from galactic records. The strange patterns in interstellar conflicts where major powers would suddenly withdraw from aggression, just as victory seemed certain. The economic data showing resource allocations that only made sense if every government was preparing for a threat that never materialized. The ethereals, those enigmatic beings who rarely communicated with other species, broke their traditional silence with a simple but devastating statement. We have always known the truth of Keth Mori. We wondered when the younger races would mature enough to see it. The most dramatic response came from the Vorthak Confederation. Representative Sistek, who had been among the most vocal advocates for feeding Sarah to the monster, appeared before the Confederation Council with a formal statement of contrition. For generations, she declared, her serpentine form coiled in the traditional posture of shame, the Vorthak people have used the Great Worm as justification for our military expansion. We have pointed to the threat from Keth Mori whenever our neighbors questioned our weapons buildup. Today we learn that we have been preparing to fight our own protector. The Trade Federation's response was more pragmatic but equally significant. Federation Chairman Yorick announced an immediate audit of all military contracts and defense spending, stating that resources spent preparing for an imaginary threat could be better used improving the lives of Federation citizens. But not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. The Molten Core Empire's crystalline leadership remained defiant, with Ambassador Drakthi insisting that the revelation was irrelevant. Whether the beast is monster or guardian makes no difference, his resonant voice declared. What matters is that it possesses power beyond any single species. Such power cannot be allowed to exist unchecked, regardless of its current intentions. Sarah listened to these responses with growing concern. Some of them still see you as a threat, she observed. Fear runs deep, Keth Mori acknowledged. For some, the loss of a common enemy means the need to find a new one. They would rather face a familiar dragon than confront the uncertainty of change. As if to prove the dragon's point, Ambassador Vextar's voice crackled through the communication channels. The Zephyrian was attempting to salvage his position by repositioning himself as a voice of caution. Noble delegates, he broadcast, while we may have been mistaken about the creature's past intentions, we must consider what this revelation means for galactic security. A being capable of maintaining such an elaborate deception for 3 millennia possesses power and cunning beyond measure. How can we be certain that this supposed confession is not merely another layer of manipulation? The suggestion sent ripples of uncertainty through the watching fleets. It was a clever argument, playing on the very paranoia that had helped maintain the dragon's mythical status for so long. Sarah felt a surge of anger. They're trying to turn your honesty into proof of your deception, she said. Yes, Keth Mori replied calmly. It is the predictable response of minds that cannot conceive of truth without ulterior motive. They assume that because they would lie to gain advantage, everyone else must be lying as well. So what do we do? How do we prove that you're telling the truth? The dragon was quiet for a moment, then turned its great head toward the bone garden surrounding them. Perhaps it is time for them to meet some of my former guests. Sarah followed the dragon's gaze and gasped. The bones she had assumed were long-dead remains were beginning to glow with the same pale light that emanated from Keth Mori's scales. But more than that, shapes were forming in the light, translucent figures that became more solid with each passing moment. Impossible, she breathed. Not impossible, Keth Mori corrected gently. Merely unexpected. I told you I offered sanctuary to those who came here. I never said that sanctuary ended with death. The figures solidifying around them were clearly the spirits of the beings whose bones lay in the garden. Dozens of different species, some familiar to Sarah from her xenobiology studies, others completely unknown. All bore expressions of peace and contentment that radiated even through their ethereal forms. Greetings, old friend, said a figure that appeared to have been some form of crystalline entity. It has been centuries since you called upon us. The time for hiding is over, Veltar, Keth Mori replied. The galaxy must choose between fear and wisdom, and they need to hear from those who found peace here. Sarah stared in wonder as more spirits manifested, each one a testament to the dragon's true nature. These were not victims, but willing refugees who had found something on this desolate world that their own civilizations could not provide. Above them, the watching fleets fell silent as their sensors detected the impossible energy readings emanating from the planet's surface. Whatever was happening down there was beyond their current understanding of physics and biology. Let them bear witness, Keth Mori said, its voice carrying to every ship in the system. Let them hear from those who chose to trust in something greater than fear. The spirits turned toward the beacon, ready to add their voices to the dragon's testimony. The galaxy was about to receive proof that would shatter any remaining doubts about Kethmori's true nature. But more than that, they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change how every species viewed death, sacrifice, and the possibility of existence beyond physical form. The dragon's revelation had been just the beginning. The manifestation of the spirit sent shockwaves through every ship in the system. Sensors that had been designed to detect life signs and energy signatures were overwhelmed by readings that defied every known law of physics. On dozens of bridges, science officers stared at their instruments in disbelief, while their commanders demanded explanations that didn't exist. Veltar, the crystalline spirit who had been the first to speak, stepped forward with movements that somehow conveyed both substance and ethereality. When it addressed the beacon, its voice carried across space with crystal-clear clarity. I am Veltar of the Luminous Dynasty, and I came to Kethmori 900 years ago, fleeing a war that would have consumed my entire species. The dragon did not devour me as my people feared. Instead, it offered me sanctuary, wisdom, and the chance to find peace in a galaxy that had forgotten what the word meant. A hegemony officer aboard one of the watching vessels whispered to his commander, "Sir, our historical records show the Luminous Dynasty as extinct. They were supposedly destroyed in the Void Wars 8 centuries ago." "Not destroyed," Veltar's spirit continued, as if hearing the conversation across the vast distance. "Saved. My people sent me here as a sacrifice, believing it would appease the great worm and spare our worlds from its wrath. Instead, I found a teacher who showed me that some battles are not worth winning, that some victories cost more than defeat." Another spirit stepped forward, a being that appeared to have been some form of aquatic species, its translucent form rippling like water made visible. "I am Thalwi of the Deep Current Collective," it said, its voice carrying the sound of ocean waves. "I came here 300 years ago, not as a sacrifice but as a seeker. My people worship strength and conquest, believing that only through dominance can peace be achieved. I came to challenge the Great Worm, to prove my worth through combat." The spirit's laugh was like the sound of waves on a peaceful shore. Kethmori did not fight me. Instead, it asked me a single question. "What is the strongest force in the universe?" Well, I spent 60 years here learning the answer. It is not conquest or dominance, but the willing choice to protect those weaker than yourself, to sacrifice your own desires for the greater good. Spirit after spirit came forward, each telling a story that contradicted everything the galaxy believed about the Great Worm. There was Zixka of the Hive Mind Collective, who had come seeking death as an escape from the constant mental noise of her species, only to find silence and solitude that allowed her true personality to emerge for the first time. There was Morden of the warrior clans, sent as tribute after his people's defeat in battle, who discovered that true strength lay in choosing when not to fight. Each testimony struck like a hammer blow against the foundations of galactic mythology. These were not random victims, but beings from across the political spectrum, some from species that were bitter enemies, others from civilizations that had never made contact with each other. The only thing they had in common was that they had all found something on Kethmori that their own worlds could not provide. Sarah watched the testimonies with growing amazement, but she also noticed something that the watching fleets might have missed. As each spirit spoke, Kethmori seemed to grow slightly dimmer, as if maintaining their manifestation was draining the dragon's own energy. "This is costing you," she said quietly. "Everything worthwhile has a cost," the dragon replied, though Sarah could hear the strain in its voice. "They need to understand not just what I have done, but why those who came here chose to stay." The spirit of an insectoid being Sarah didn't recognize stepped forward next. Its voice buzzed with harmonic overtones that spoke of vast hive cities and collective consciousness. "I am Cuvex of the Eternal Swarm," it announced. "My species believes that individuals exist only to serve the collective, that personal desires are a weakness to be eliminated. I was sent here as punishment for questioning the Hive Mother's decisions, expected to die as a cautionary tale to other potential dissidents." The spirit's form pulsed with soft light as it continued. "Kethmori taught me that questioning authority is not a weakness, but the first step toward wisdom. It showed me that a collective can be stronger when its members think for themselves, when they choose to contribute rather than being forced to comply. On the Zephyrian mothership, Ambassador Vextar was frantically trying to maintain control of the narrative. Visual effects and holograms he broadcast on emergency channels. The creature is using unknown technology to project these illusions. Do not be deceived by this elaborate theater. But his protestations fell on increasingly deaf ears. Too many of the spirits were identifying themselves as specific individuals from recorded history, beings whose deaths had been documented, whose final transmissions had been received by their home worlds. The implications were staggering. The most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. A figure materialized that Sarah recognized from her xenobiology studies, the distinctive crystalline structure and energy patterns of a molten core Empire citizen. I am Velthara, former High Counselor of the Molten Core Empire, the spirit announced, its form radiating the same orange light that characterized its living species. I came here 50 years ago not as a sacrifice but as a volunteer. The silence from the Empire's ships was deafening. A former High Counselor was supposed to have died in a mining accident, a tragedy that had sparked reforms in industrial safety protocols. To learn that she had instead chosen exile to Kethmori sent shockwaves through the Empire's rigid hierarchy. I served the Empire for 2 centuries, Velthara continued, rising through the ranks by demonstrating the ruthlessness and ambition that our culture prizes. But with each promotion, I grew more disturbed by what our pursuit of power was costing us. We had become a species that measured success only by dominance over others. Her voice carried the weight of profound regret. When I could no longer stomach the suffering we inflicted in the name of strength, I staged my own death and came here seeking the monster that was supposedly the Empire's greatest enemy. Instead, I found the wisest being I had ever encountered, one who showed me that true strength lies in choosing peace when war would be easier. Ambassador Drakth's crystalline form visibly dimmed as he processed this revelation. The Empire's current aggressive stance toward neighboring species suddenly seemed not like necessary pragmatism, but like the actions of the very system his predecessor had abandoned. Sarah noticed that Kethmori was now visibly trembling with the effort of maintaining so many spirit manifestations. The dragon's scales had lost much of their luminous quality, and its breathing had become labored. "That's enough," she said firmly, struggling to her feet despite her still healing injuries. "You're exhausting yourself maintaining their forms." "The galaxy needs to hear this," Kethmori protested weakly. "The galaxy has heard enough," Sarah replied. "They have the testimony of dozens of spirits, proof that everything they believed was wrong. Now it's time for them to decide what they're going to do with that knowledge." She turned toward the beacon, addressing the watching fleets directly. "You've seen the truth now. The Great Worm isn't your enemy, it never was. It's been your guardian, your protector, and the keeper of your unwanted souls for 3,000 years. The question isn't whether you believe this anymore. The question is what kind of galaxy you want to build now that you know." As the spirits began to fade, each offering a final bow of respect to both Sarah and Kethmori, the young human helped the exhausted dragon settle more comfortably among the bones of its ancient charges. "Rest," she said gently. "You've carried their burden long enough. Now it's time to let them carry their own." Above them, 47 billion beings across the galaxy sat in stunned silence, trying to process the fundamental shift in their understanding of the universe. The age of the Great Worm was ending, but what would replace it remained to be seen. 6 months after what historians would later call the Kethmori revelation, the galaxy was still reeling from the aftershocks of that momentous day. The immediate aftermath had been chaotic, with some governments collapsing under the weight of public outrage over millennia of deception, while others had scrambled to redefine their positions in a universe where their greatest threat had been revealed as their greatest. Protector. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the research station that now orbited Kethmori, watching the steady stream of ships arriving from across the galaxy. What had once been a dead world avoided by all spacefaring species had become the most visited planet in known space. Pilgrims, diplomats, scientists, and simple curiosity seekers came daily to see the dragon who had shaped galactic history from the shadows. The transformation had not been easy. The early days after the revelation had seen an alarming spike in interstellar conflicts as some species, freed from their shared fear of the Great Worm, had immediately moved to settle old scores with their neighbors. For a terrifying few weeks it had seemed that Kethmori's sacrifice might have been for nothing. Then something unexpected happened. The spirits of those who had found sanctuary on the dead world began appearing on other planets, sharing their stories not just with government officials, but with ordinary citizens across the galaxy. The message they carried was simple but profound. There was another way to live, another way to resolve conflicts, another way to find strength. The morning reports, Dr. Chen, said Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, Sarah's research assistant and one of the first Earth citizens to volunteer for the Kethmori project. The young Japanese woman had been fascinated by the xenobiological implications of the dragon's healing abilities and had become invaluable in establishing communication protocols with visiting species. Sarah accepted the datapad, scanning the daily summaries of galactic developments. The news was cautiously optimistic. The Vorthak Confederation had announced a 60% reduction in military spending, redirecting those resources toward scientific research and cultural exchange programs. The Trade Federation had established the first interspecies university, located on a neutral world and dedicated to studying peaceful coexistence. Even the Molten Core Empire had begun showing signs of change, with Ambassador Drakthi himself requesting permission to establish a permanent diplomatic station on Kethmori. Most remarkably, the hegemony had split into two factions. Supreme Chancellor Morthak's hardline government still controlled the core worlds, but over half of the member species had formed the new hegemony, dedicated to the principles that Kethmori's spirits had shared. The division had been peaceful, a fact that would have been impossible under the old system of fear-based politics. "How is our patient today?" Sarah asked, using the affectionate term she had adopted for the ancient dragon. "Stronger than yesterday, though still recovering," Tanaka replied. "The constant stream of visitors has been energizing, but the medical scans show that manifesting all those spirits really did drain centuries from its life force." Sarah felt a familiar pang of guilt. The revelation that had freed the galaxy might have cost Kethmori decades or even centuries of its remaining existence. When she had first suggested that the dragon tell its story, she hadn't fully understood the price such honesty would demand. They walked together through the station's corridors, past laboratories where scientists from dozens of species worked side by side, studying phenomena that had been dismissed as impossible just months earlier. The dragon's ability to maintain spiritual manifestations had opened entirely new fields of research into consciousness, energy, and the nature of existence itself. The transport down to the planet's surface was routine now, though Sarah still marveled at the changes that had transformed Kethmori. The Bone Garden remained, but it was no longer a monument to isolation. Beings from across the galaxy came to pay their respects to the spirits who had found peace there, and many chose to stay for extended periods, seeking the same wisdom and tranquility that the ancient sanctuary had provided. Temporary structures had been erected to house the influx of visitors, research facilities, diplomatic quarters, and meditation centers where beings could contemplate the lessons the spirits had shared. The dead world was becoming alive again, not with cities and industry, but with something far more precious: hope. Sarah found Kethmori in its favorite spot, a sheltered alcove where the dragon could observe the activities around the Bone Garden while remaining largely undisturbed. The great being was visibly older than it had been 6 months ago, its scales less lustrous and its movements more deliberate. But there was something in its ancient eyes that Sarah had never seen before: contentment. "Good morning, old friend," Sarah said, settling beside the dragon as she had done every day since the revelation. The morning reports show 3 more species requesting membership in the Peaceful Worlds Alliance. "We're up to 47 member civilizations now." 47, Kethmori mused, its voice carrying a note of wonder. "In 3,000 years of enforced peace through fear, I never imagined that so many would choose cooperation freely when given the chance. Fear is a powerful motivator, but it's also temporary," Sarah replied. "Hope lasts longer. The spirits you protected all those years, they're still out there spreading that hope. Every world they visit, every being they speak to becomes another voice for change." A new ship was approaching the planet, Sarah noticed, a sleek vessel bearing the markings of the Ethereal Council. The enigmatic beings who had remained aloof from galactic politics for millennia had become regular visitors to Kethmori, engaging in long conversations with the dragon about matters that remained largely mysterious to other species. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Giving up your carefully maintained isolation to try something this uncertain?" Kethamori was quiet for a long moment, watching as a group of young beings from different species played together in the bone garden, their laughter echoing off the ancient remains of those who had found peace in this place. I spent 3 millennia as a living symbol of fear, the dragon finally said. Every day I wondered if the price of peace was too high, if the suffering I endured to maintain the balance was truly worth the wars prevented. Now I see children from species that were mortal enemies just months ago playing together as friends. How could I regret that? Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the planet's artificial atmosphere. The galaxy is still changing. Not all the news is good. There are still conflicts, still species that prefer the old ways of dominance and aggression. But the seeds are planted now. The idea that there might be a better way is spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. And it began with one injured human who refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. Kethamori observed. Your species has a remarkable gift for seeing possibilities where others see only obstacles. Maybe that's what makes humans human, Sarah replied. We're too stubborn to accept impossible situations and too optimistic to believe that broken systems can't be fixed. As if summoned by their conversation, Tanaka's voice crackled through Sarah's communication device. Dr. Chen, you're needed at the communications center. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Sarah excused herself and made her way to the station, wondering what news from home might require such urgency. When she activated the communication terminal, she was surprised to see Admiral Martinez, the head of Earth's Interstellar Relations Division. Dr. Chen, the Admiral said, his weathered face serious but not unfriendly, I wanted to personally inform you that the Earth Council has voted unanimously to establish the Sarah Chen Institute for Interstellar Mediation. The facility will be built on Kethamori, with your dragon friend's permission, of course. Sarah blinked in surprise. Sir, I don't understand. An institute for what? For studying and teaching the methods you've pioneered here, Martinez explained. The galaxy is changing faster than anyone anticipated, and there's a growing demand for beings who understand how to facilitate peaceful transitions between old systems and new ones. We want Earth to be at the forefront of that movement. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Just months ago, she had been an unknown junior researcher on a survey mission. Now she was being asked to help lead humanity's efforts to reshape galactic civilization. I'm honored, Admiral, but I think you have the wrong person, she protested. I didn't do anything special. I just talked to Kethamori like a fellow being instead of a monster. Exactly, Martinez replied with a slight smile. That's exactly what made all the difference. The galaxy spent 3,000 years treating their greatest protector as their greatest threat, because they couldn't see past their own fear and prejudice. You saw through all that to the truth underneath. That's not a common skill, Dr. Chen, and it's one the galaxy desperately needs more of. After the call ended, Sarah returned to Kethamori and shared the news. The dragon listened thoughtfully, then slowly nodded its great head. The student becomes the teacher, it said with approval. Yes, I think an institute here would be fitting. This world has always been a place where beings come to learn difficult truths about themselves and their universe. It seems appropriate that it should continue serving that purpose. As the twin suns of the Kethamori system set behind the ancient bone garden, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Sarah Chen reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a captive facing certain death. Now she was being asked to help build a better future for the entire galaxy. The great worm of galactic mythology was gone forever, revealed as the gentle guardian it had always been. In its place was something far more powerful, the knowledge that even the most entrenched systems could be changed, that even the oldest fears could be overcome, and that sometimes the most profound revolutions began with a single person who refused to accept that things had to remain as they were. Kethamori, the keeper of the deep peace, would no longer keep that peace alone. The galaxy was finally ready to help.